The Smith & Wesson Schofield didn't gain the fame of the Colt Peacemaker, but it still carved out a notable spot in firearms history. Officially called the S&W Model 3, this revolver holds a key place in Old West history. When we look back at the time when cartridge firearms were replacing old cap and ball designs, the Colt Single Action Army, the famous Peacemaker, usually takes center stage. But right there in the shadows are the Schofield and the Remington 1875. These three revolvers, crafted by legendary American gun makers, competed to be the top choice in a time shaped by industrial growth, mass production, and military contracts, all as the nation pushed further into the western frontier. The Colt Peacemaker ultimately prevailed. The U.S. military adopted it as their preferred sidearm, and it dominated the market. There wasn't much of a competition with the S&W Model 3. Approximately 54,000 Smith & Wesson top-break revolvers were produced between 1868 and 1898 before the company stopped making them. Colt, on the other hand, turned out 357,859 single-action Army revolvers between 1873 and 1940. So, what gave Colt the edge? On paper, its revolver wasn't necessarily a better military weapon. The real difference came down to timing, politics, logistics, and a bid for a government ammunition contract that partly worked in Smith & Wesson's favor, and partly didn't. Ironically, that same move helped pave the way for one of Colt's biggest wins and led to one of the most iconic American handgun cartridges, decades later. With a hinge just in front of the trigger guard and a latch above the hammer, the Schofield was intended to be a top-break revolver. Releasing the latch allowed the revolver to swing open, much like a break-action shotgun, revealing all 6 chambers at once. It came equipped with a star-shaped ejector that expelled all 6 spent cartridges in one motion when opened. This setup made reloading significantly faster. If speed loaders had been around back then, the Schofield would have been perfect for them, and in fact, many people today use reproduction models with speed loaders or moon clips. That's no surprise, since this efficient reloading method influenced later revolvers with swing-out cylinders. In the chaos of a fight, the Schofield's design made reloading quicker and more manageable, especially for riders on horseback. Still, the S&W revolver had its flaws. The early Model 3 versions were known for latch issues, and they were chambered in .44 S&W American, a round that lacked stopping power compared to others of the time. Major George W. Schofield suggested modifications to make the revolver more suitable for cavalry use, and as a result, it was given a new name. At his suggestion, Smith & Wesson moved the latch from the barrel to the frame, making it easier to operate with one hand. He also had them add a spring to the barrel catch for smoother handling. Another improvement Schofield pushed for was using heat-treated, replaceable latch parts, since that area of the revolver tended to wear out the fastest. The single-action Army is a tough, straightforward revolver, but it's not without its drawbacks. If you've ever dug around about Old West firearms, you've probably come across stories about how gunfighters often loaded only 5 rounds, leaving one chamber empty. That wasn't just a rumor. It was a smart safety measure. Back then, the firing pin rested directly on the primer of a loaded cartridge when the hammer was down. So if the revolver got bumped, dropped, or the hammer was struck, there was a serious risk it could fire unintentionally. Long before transfer bar safety was a common feature, this was the case. The same issue existed with earlier cap and ball revolvers, which is why many models from the 1860s had safety notches between chambers, places where the hammer could rest without touching a primer. Strangely enough, Smith & Wesson did not add that feature on the Schofield, and Colt did not put it on the single-action Army. Remington, however, did build it into their Model 1875. But how big of an issue was it, really? Military manuals from the time didn't mention the practice. Sure, safety-minded individuals, or folks working dangerous jobs like cowboys, might have chosen to rest the hammer on an empty chamber. Still, it's very likely that plenty of revolver carriers, especially those with a single-action army, preferred having 6 shots ready to go instead of sacrificing one for safety. That was especially true with the SAA, since reloading it wasn't exactly quick or convenient. Once all 6 shots are fired from a Colt Peacemaker, reloading takes a bit of a process. The hammer should first be brought to the half-cock position. Then, open the loading gate on the side of the frame. Next, use the ejector rod to push out each spent casing, turning the cylinder so every chamber lines up with the gate. And if you were using black powder cartridges, it could be even harder due to fouling. Now, load new rounds one at a time while rotating the cylinder once more. Close the loading gate. You can now fire again after you finally bring the hammer back to full cock. Loading a Frontier-era revolver was a complex process requiring 6 distinct steps and considerable manual dexterity. While manageable at a shooting range, imagine attempting this procedure while crouching behind cover during a gunfight or bouncing in a saddle at full gallop. The difficulty increased exponentially under such circumstances. The Remington Model 1875 represented an improvement over previous cap and ball designs. Yet its operation remained cumbersome compared to modern handguns. Even when fully loaded with 6 cartridges, reloading time matched that of its competitor, the Colt Single-Action Army. A significant milestone occurred in 1870 when the United States Army officially adopted the Smith & Wesson Model 3 revolver chambered in 44S and W American. This marked the first standard-issue cartridge revolver in American military history, representing a technological leap while many foreign militaries continued using percussion firearms. By 1873, the Army expanded its arsenal to include the now legendary Colt Single-Action Army. Around 1875, Smith & Wesson secured another military contract for an upgraded Model 3 variant, the Schofield, with the understanding it would chamber the military's existing .45 Colt ammunition. However, when the revolvers arrived, they contained a surprise. Smith & Wesson had chambered them for their proprietary .45 Schofield cartridge. Though similar to the .45 Colt, the Schofield round was shorter, with slightly lower pressure specifications. Smith & Wesson made this calculated step in an effort to simultaneously establish their revolver and proprietary ammunition in military circles. Initially, this gambit succeeded. Major George Schofield, the namesake of the revolver, had powerful contacts, particularly his brother John M. Schofield, who was in charge of the Army Ordnance Board. Many historians believe these family ties helped secure the revolver's adoption. Ironically, these same connections may have contributed to its eventual removal from service. In a somber historical footnote, Lieutenant Colonel John Schofield died by suicide in 1882, using the very revolver bearing his family name during a period of personal crisis. The military soon faced a significant logistical problem. Field units received a mixture of Colt Single-Action Army revolvers and Schofield revolvers, creating ammunition compatibility issues. Existing stockpiles of .45 Colt ammunition couldn't function in the Schofield revolvers due to their shorter cylinders. The situation created dangerous scenarios. Soldiers equipped with Schofields might receive unusable .45 Colt ammunition, while those with Colts faced another problem. Early Schofield cartridges featured wider rims than .45 Colt brass. When loaded into a Colt revolver, these wider rims could overlap and jam the cylinder, especially when all 6 chambers contained ammunition. This effectively reduced a 6-shooter to a 3- or 4-shot weapon, a potentially fatal limitation in combat. The military eventually resolved these issues by modifying the .45 Schofield cartridge to match the rim diameter of the .45 Colt. Known as the M1887 military ball cartridge, this improved round performed consistently in both types of revolvers. Despite these advancements, the Schofield was eventually phased out when the Army settled on the Colt Single-Action Army. They then made a temporary transition to the IN 1892. .38 Colt long. The lighter recoiling was surprisingly preferred by many warriors. Even in their Colt revolvers, they use .45 Schofield ammo. With limited training and practice ammunition, troops found the reduced recoil improved their shooting accuracy. The original .45 Colt load featured a 255-grain lead bullet propelled by 40 grains of black powder, generating approximately 1,050 feet per second muzzle velocity, along with substantial recoil. Eventually, the military reduced the powder charge to 28 grains, lowering velocity to around 855 feet per second. The 230-grain .45 Schofield round, however, was fired at about 730 feet per second by the shorter-barreled Smith & Wesson Model 3. A modified M1887 cartridge with a 250-grain bullet and 26 grains of black powder fired at approximately 760 feet per second. As the 20th century approached, the Army sought to transition to semi-automatic pistols and needed to establish ammunition specifications. The .45 Colt had earned a reputation as a man-stopper, particularly when compared to the underwhelming performance of the .38 long Colt during the Philippine-American War, 1899 to 1902. However, smokeless powder versions of the .45 Colt produced even heavier recoil, requiring more training for accurate follow-up shots. The .45 Schofield and reduced power .45 Colt loads offered better controllability. The Army directed Colt and John M. Browning to design a cartridge with recoil characteristics akin to the lighter when they were creating specs for their new semi-automatic weapon. Schofield 45 instead of full power. Kirkbeach Colt. Browning responded by developing the .45A CP cartridge, paired with what would become the M1911 pistol. The 230-grain bullet in the standard .45 ACP load travels at about 830 feet per second, which is strikingly comparable to the ballistics of the military's favorite frontier-era cartridge. Without the ammunition compatibility challenges between the Colt and Schofield revolvers in the 1870s, the iconic .45 ACP cartridge might have developed very differently, or perhaps not existed at all in its current form. It's interesting to note that Browning didn't like the .45 caliber. After the iconic M1911 and .45 ACP, Browning's handgun designs explored different calibers exclusively. His subsequent creations included the 9mm high power, completed after his death, the .2 long rifle Colt Woodsman, and the .380 ACP Colt 1903 hammerless. When designing for FN, Browning developed models like the M1900, 1903, and 1910, all chambered in either .32 or .38 calibers. The M1911 thus stands as Browning's singular contribution to .45 ACP firearms development. Although the Colt Peacemaker became the more iconic of the two, the Schofield revolver earned its own solid place in firearms history. The Smith & Wesson Model 3 saw use in several major conflicts, including the Indian Wars, the Spanish-American War, and the Philippine-American War. While the military struggled with standardization, many civilians, both lawmen and outlaws, gravitated toward the Schofield, including some well-known figures. According to reports, Jesse James occasionally carried a Schofield, which Robert Ford used to shoot James dead in 1882. Other historical figures who reportedly carried the Schofield include Theodore Roosevelt, John Wesley Hardin, Pat Garrett, Virgil Earp, Emiliano Zapata, and Billy the Kid. Some sources even claim that Wyatt Earp had a Model 3 Schofield on his side during the legendary gunfight at the OK Corral, where he, along with his brothers Virgil and Morgan and Doc Holliday, faced off against the Clantons, the McClorys, and Billy Claiborne in Tombstone, Arizona. Smith & Wesson manufactured a significant quantity of revolvers for the Russian Empire under contract, while simultaneously continuing to improve the Model 3 for the American military. These Russian versions, referred to as the first, second, and third model Russians, incorporated various design changes requested by Russian military inspectors. After the Spanish-American War ended in 1898, the U.S. Army gradually sold off its remaining Smith & Wesson revolvers. Many of these firearms were refurbished by dealers and gunsmiths before being sold on the civilian market. A significant number of those refurbished Schofield revolvers ended up in the hands of Wells Fargo and Company. Their agents, tasked with guarding stagecoaches and freight wagons carrying valuable shipments through hazardous territory, relied on these reliable sidearms. Should you ever come across an antique top-break revolver with stamps such as WF & Co. or Wells Fargo & Co., it is likely to be one of those rare Wells Fargo Schofields, which could be highly prized by collectors.